By becoming the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for the general election campaign, Donald Trump will soon be privy to secret intelligence briefings under a long-standing bipartisan tradition whereby would-be successors to the current president receive classified briefings to bring them up to speed on emerging threats around the world. But not everybody's comfortable with Mr. Trump having access to classified information. Most notably, many within the intelligence community, at least as being reported by many journalists who cover the national security beat. We'll talk about that with our friend Marc Ginsberg, former U.S. ambassador to Morocco. He also served as President Carter's deputy senior advisor for Mideast policy, and he's managing director at Levick Strategic Communications. He joins us from Washington. Thanks for being with us, Marc, as always.
Thank you, Larry.
In a great piece by Shane Harris in the Daily Beast, he writes that the intelligence community is worried that Donald Trump will spill state secrets after he becomes eligible for classified briefings. Harris writes, take a conspiracy-minded shoot-from-the-hip candidate and classified briefings and watch current and former intelligence officials squirm. As a former diplomat, are you squirming?
I think I'm doing more than squirming. I think he put it tamely. Look, Larry, putting aside the fact that every presumptive candidate for the nomination needs to have those briefings, you can look at it as a two sides of the same coin. Is it going to educate Mr. Trump into being more circumspect and less intrusive and just rambling off the top of his tongue anything that comes to his head, and therefore could be construed as revealing classified information? Or, as may have been just quoted in the Daily Beast article, the fact that you're now providing credible information to back up his conspiracy theories, the way he may twist and turn the facts to suit his purposes, can make this even more complicated for those who wish to protect state security here in the United States.
Well, you know, many people may forget about this. You're probably too young to remember. But John Kennedy in 1960 was giving private briefings, and one of the things he was told about was Cuba. I forget the individual circumstance, but in the campaign debate against Nixon, Kennedy charged that nothing was happening with Cuba because he knew what the information was about Cuba. Nixon couldn't reveal anything because Kennedy had the information, but Kennedy used it. So what's wrong if Trump were to use it?
Well, it depends, again, whether or not you're doing, or even to take this information further about the so-called missile gap that existed in that debate, as you may recall, Larry, between Kennedy and Nixon. But let's play this out. If you study Mr. Trump's foreign policy speech, if you understand that in some respects he really needs to be better educated, that the criticism about his speech from very reasonable sources suggests that it's full of contradictions, that he's making accusations that are unsubstantiated, that there are facts that he's referring to that are being made out of thin air. Well, I would argue that on the one hand, it's probably much more beneficial that he have information in order to perhaps get him better educated. Let's assume that as a real estate developer, he'd be able to mouth less off about the shape of a doorknob if he understood the construction of a doorknob than if he assumed that he knew what the doorknob should look like. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt on the briefing, but at the same time, I want to make it very clear, Larry, this is a man who won't even study the Cliff Notes. So how are we going to impute to him the ability to take this classified information and put it in the right framework?
Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut was quoted as saying that Donald Trump has no moral or ethical grounding, should not be privy to any state secrets. He said Trump wouldn't think twice of taking classified information, putting it out in the public realm, if he thought it would serve his political purposes. You share that view?
I would say that my friend Senator Murphy reflects and is channeling, I think, a lot of concerns that many of us have, whether you be Democrat or Republican. that this capacity of Mr. Trump to just shoot from the mouth instead of deciding and reflecting on what he's about to say.
But don't you think that Donald Trump is, I mean, he's not stupid. You actually think he would harp on what might be a key foreign policy decision being made in the administration and jump on it for use in a political campaign that would benefit him and harm the country?
I don't think it's a question of intent. He may be intentionally going after targets of opportunity in his political campaign. I think the concern is the inadvertence, Larry. It is the fact that when he beats himself into a frenzy in front of his rallies, that he may just blatantly shout out something because he just never computed it to be put in a lockbox away from what essentially is his stump speech. I've watched this, Larry, forensically, and you have to be concerned about it. He's smart. There's no doubt he wouldn't have gotten to where he's gotten to. But being smart and being wise are two different things.
How is he regarded overseas?
Well, it's interesting. There was a very interesting piece, Larry, over the weekend in the Washington Post about this very issue. And I think it's, let's sum it up this way. The Mexican government is extraordinarily concerned about his intents and his intention towards Mexico. The Chinese are concerned that he, in effect, is looking to provoke a showdown over not only China's trade agreements, but also its policies in the Pacific. I think our Japanese and South Korean friends are extraordinarily concerned that he's withdrawing from the Pacific or may want to withdraw and therefore trigger expansionism on the part of the Chinese. I don't think the Israelis take at face value that he would be a strong ally of Israel. And most importantly, our European allies are concerned about his commitments that said that he's going to withdraw from NATO, that he's going to provide nuclear weapons to other third parties, and that he's going to engage the United States militarily without consulting with our allies and then withdrawing when he deems it fit. Look, the world is far more dangerous today than it was about 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, Larry, because of the circumstance involving ISIS and Putin, et cetera. And so he's sending contradictory signals every which way.
Are you going to support, you're not going to support Trump, are you going to support Hillary or not support anyone?
No, I'm definitely supporting Mrs. Clinton for the one reason that I, first of all, respect her stewardship and knowledge of foreign policy, and respect the fact that Mrs. Clinton understands the nuances of these issues far better than Mr. Trump ever hopes to. At a time when you can't have too much training on the job, and I've watched this happen under Mr. Obama, we really need someone who understands and respects the role of the United States in the world, but is not prepared to go gunning whenever it suits the purpose to go shooting.
She is regarded as more hawkish than Obama, more hawkish than Trump. Is she?
I would say that watching her stewardship on the Armed Services Committee, Larry, and watching her as Secretary of State, she has far more capacity to engage our adversaries as well as our allies. And I think she also has a much more measured appreciation of the role of what I would call forward engagement in trying to prevent catastrophes such as Syria from getting out of control. I'll just tell you a quick vignette. She wanted to work with the Free Syrian military as well as with our Turkish allies. And on the way to Istanbul to a meeting, the White House pulled the rug out from underneath her. I'm absolutely convinced, because I follow this very closely, that had she had her way, and with the support of, by the way, of Bob Gates, who was then our Secretary of Defense, the White House would not have found itself losing credibility in Syria if they had indeed not pulled the rug out from underneath her.
You're working on something regarding ISIS. Tell us about it.
I've been engaged for the last year with our allies in the Middle East, as well as with certain European governments, to develop an anti-ISIS counterterrorism social media enterprise to combat ISIS's attraction to Arab recruits particularly in North Africa. I don't know, Larry, our viewers probably would have no idea that, for example, Tunisia provides the largest source of recruits to ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Our goal has been to stem that, to combat their narrative, as well as to isolate and neutralize their recruiting operation in Tunisia using social media and counterterrorism support from a variety of governments.
Your goal, you mean is the government supporting you, or is this a private organization?
This has nothing to do with the U.S. government. This is with the foreign governments that have a stake in the success of this enterprise.
Wouldn't you imagine our government would support it?
I'm sure it would, but the people who enlisted me were very emphatic that because of the, shall we say, the heavy hand of the United States in these issues, they preferred working outside the confines of the U.S. government on this.
North Korea has announced that it will expand its nuclear program in defiance of UN resolutions. Can anyone or any country or organization bring these ambitions down? Do you worry about North Korea?
I worry about it a lot, Larry. When you trace the policies since President Clinton, which was in effect some version of what we would call strategic containment, and that is to use punitive measures against North Korea, such as economic sanctions, such as leverage over China. The fact that they are now being able to potentially, and I'm using the word potentially, miniaturize an atomic weapon to place it on one of their missiles and test it should be a great foreboding warning that our policy needs a complete new direction. Look, Larry, we're at a point right now where we have a uncontrollable North Korean government with a leader who is doubly irrational about his nuclear weapons program, who's threatening our allies as well as potentially has the capacity soon to put a weapon on top of a missile. And by the way, our intelligence officials would suggest that he's not that far away, that something more is going to have to be done than some Iran nuclear agreement version for North Korea. I'm afraid, Larry, we're reaching a point of no return soon with North Korea.
Mark, always great talking with you. You're a great guest and very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Larry. Great to be with you as always.